You are watching Conscious Evolution with Wes Heffernan.
So the first thing, again, relate to ourselves as temple builders. So while I am not a Mason, Freemasonry has always been an extraordinarily important part of my life. Plumb level square, the ideas of what it takes to build something in a state of, close as you can to perfection. So we made our first stop, the Masonic Temple there in Detroit, and it's fantastic. Like just the architecture, all of the different carvings in the stone of the building. I was really hoping to go in, but it was closed. But we did, walk around it, and I took some pictures. Mm-hmm. It was pretty neat.
Who was with you?
So my brother, and there's this huge age difference. My brother's 20. My son is 19, so there's only a year difference between my brother and my son, which is a really neat concept that I'm going to get into eventually. I think we touched on it a little bit in chapter 1 as well, but my brother was with me, and that was the first thing we did. And after that, we went to the Henry Ford Museum of Innovation, and that's really where things begin to unfold and really start to click, or hey, let's take this journey with purpose and intent. Well, that was the first thing that truly began to open my eyes to the importance of living life with purpose and intent, and then allowing that experience to speak to you, right? To become, to be born into an experience that actually moves you and helps you become more.
Yeah, around all that innovation, I can imagine.
Well, see, I didn't even know I just thought it was a museum, right? I didn't know it was the Museum of Innovation. And we've been to lots of museums, right? And, even here in Raleigh, we have some fantastic, museums to go to that are free. We pull into the entrance, and it's this long road with these brick walls, and there's this huge village off to the right. And it's like, man, all this is part of the museum? Like, are we even in the right place? It was snowing, there's this much snow on the ground. And we weren't even sure if we were in the right place, but anyway, we eventually make it to the actual museum and park and go in. And it wasn't until, about a third of the way through the museum that it really began showing itself to me in a way that really fit with the intent and the purpose of the journey that we were taking.
Was it auto-related mostly?
No, that's what I was thinking, right? Henry Ford, we're going to see the Model T, we're going to see some cars, we're going to see, the birth of, the evolutionary process of, the assembly line.
Right.
I was expecting things like that. Well, the first thing we run into is, it was cars. It was all this line of presidential limousines. They had the limousine that Kennedy was assassinated in, for example. And they went all the way back to, I don't remember the name of the president, this very first one, but it was a horse and cart type limousine. All right, and then we move over to the trains and looking at how, the evolutionary process of steam engines and whatnot. But when we turned the corner, we had race cars.
Okay.
But then, like I said, it was about a third of the way through, I got into this area that was about power. And that's when it began to come to life for me. Looking at, how we begin to turn human power into mechanical power, into electrical power, and then we begin to manipulate power, and then, it really brought to life, to keep that thread going, it really brought to life the idea of how we move from A to B, and then transform that B into a new A so that we can move to a new B, and then you transform that B into a new A so we can move to another, more expanded.
Did they get into hydrogen or hybrid or
No.
any of that stuff?
Well, no, not really.
EVs?
Not there. We got into, believe it or not, a little bit of that later on in the trip. Looking at our Route 66 journey across Oklahoma, we started that at a car museum, and they had the very first electric vehicle from Toyota in there.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, they didn't. We'll get to that in a minute. But no, it didn't go into any of that. But it was wind power, water power, and I honestly didn't know how old some of those concepts were. Not necessarily in this country, but in Europe and other areas. Wind and water power had been used for quite some time. And we ran into really neat stuff with micro and macro. They had the giant versions of all these different machines, but then encased in glass, they had the miniature versions. That's cool. And so you could kind of, again, it's tying in these concepts that are pertinent to the discussion we're having on this channel. With expanding and contracting, micro, macro, fractals, things like that. But by the time I got to the end of the section about power, it really began crystallizing itself into, man, this is pretty cool when you live life with intent and purpose, and to find answers, or life begins to speak to you and begins to show you things. And so we wrapped up the power aspect and began to move back through, and the next thing that caught my eye was this section on math, and it was these big gold letters, really neat, shiny, Mathematica. It's like, oh yeah, as I love math anyway. Geometry is an important part of building building the structures we build. Math, I use it every day, all day long in what we're doing. And I've always been interested in it. It's been, your left brain, right brain, either it's science and math or it's literature and art. I'm fairly balanced in there, but I'm still lean more towards, science and math. That's kind of been a bigger part of my life, really. But so we went on into Mathematica. And man, there's all these quotes hanging from the ceiling, and it's just like, it just really starts quickly, like, oh my goodness, oh look at that, oh wow, right? And so I kind of toured through the math section and taking in all these ideas that I wanted to, have wanted to talk about in this channel later on as we begin to dive deeper and deeper and deeper into these concepts. And so these quotes that you're seeing right now, they'll all come into play later on as we finish building the stage, and we can begin telling a much richer story using a lot of these quotes right here from people that most of y'all are going to have heard of, even if you're not into math. We all went to school and learned about math, so
wow. So from Detroit to now we're talking about Route 66.
Well, we haven't quite gotten to Route 66. We're still in Detroit right now, so because there's one more section to go in. We came out of the math. My battery died on my GoPro, and so I'm walking back out to the car, and this is when I realized that I'm in the Museum of Innovation. I still, up to this point, I didn't really know, but when I went out and got my new batteries and came back in, we come across this sign right here, right in the entrance. And it's this quote that really struck me. It's like, man, there's more here than meets the eye, and this is something that maybe it's because of the perspective I have coming in. It's different. Maybe all museums are museums of innovation, and I've just never had that purpose and intent that allowed me to see it in the way that I'm seeing this museum today. But so we come back out and I go into this area that's time, and to be honest, it was a little disappointing. I was like, oh man, time, yeah, that's going to be cool. And it ended up being about watches and like stuff like that. But the bigger concept within that section was the evolutionary process of, you know, kind of tying everything together. It was like, okay, well now we have access to this power, and we have, through math and geometry and you know, structure, things that create form and structure, you know, now we're able to evolve as a civilization and to begin moving towards things that we desire. Instead of survival, we're moving towards creating things, literally things, right? And so, you know, that's where the Model T came into play. And so when I initially went in and looked around, I was like, well, you know, this wasn't what I was hoping it would be, but I've gotten so much out of everything else. But by the time I came back out, it began to, up here, kind of explain itself. It's like, you have to look at the bigger picture. You have to understand what time is. Time isn't real, so there's nothing in here that's going to be real for you. But when you look at these other two things, these other two aspects, and put time in the middle of it, and you see how these are rotating around time, and then that evolutionary process of expansion, right? Time equals expansion or contraction. It's breathing in, breathing out.
Thanks for watching. Join us next time on Conscious Evolution. Don't forget to subscribe.